Well, good morning. So, I know I promised I'd have this out right away, and it wasn't right away. That's on me. The excuse I'm going to go with today, it doesn't matter. Anyway, so installing the turbo. That's what we're going to talk about today, is getting the turbo installed. If you're doing a rebuild of your engine, which means you're pulling the engine out of the vehicle, I would really highly recommend figuring out how to get that wiring harness out and just doing all of that on the engine stand. I've installed the turbo in the vehicle probably 4 times now, and every time I kind of regretted it. Basically, it's not difficult. The problem is that you're working kind of upside down in a hole, leaning over the engine. It's hard to get to. That's all. But that said, there are going to be some things that you need to do maintenance-wise. Is replacing the swirl motor considered a maintenance item, I guess? But there are going to be some things that you need to do that the turbo will have to come off for, and it's probably not worth pulling the whole engine. So this video may help you for that, for sure. So anyway, here's the part 16. We're going to get the turbo installed in the vehicle, and frankly, that's kind of the last thing we have to do. So right after this, I think we're going to get to see some awesome startup video, and then we'll wrap things up. But anyway, here we are, installing the turbo.
See these gaskets here? Install those first. Otherwise, you're going to have to do this, which is the opposite of putting the turbo in, but after you've put the turbo in. It's not fun. Anyway, once you have those gaskets in place and you're ready to install the turbo, the new seal goes on here, a little metal gasket. It's going to flip on there. And the nice thing is it sort of clips on and holds itself in place while you rotate that around and sort of wiggle it in. You got to sneak it under the cowl and all that. The biggest problem is that it's heavy and you're kind of leaning over the car and all of that. It's just not in a very convenient place. Again, boy, I wish I would have put this on before, while it was still on the stand. But, you know, it's that wiring harness. So, anyway, don't do what I did, kids. Once that's down in place, though, this is a view from above, of course. The top of the screen would be towards the front of the engine. And there's two Torx bolts that will drop down in there, kind of between the two halves of the turbo there. And they'll just go right on in, and that holds the turbo onto the pedestal. Nice and easy. Once those things are in and tightened down by finger tight or what have you, we'll go ahead and get them torqued in place. Once the bolts are finger tight and all that, we've got to go ahead and torque them down. So that's going to go to 20 Newton meters, which in freedom units is approximately 177 inch pounds. That's like 14 some odd foot pounds. And then once it's to that, the second stage is a 60-degree turn on those bolts.
The turbo itself having been mounted, now we need to connect the exhaust. Remember those gaskets I said you had to make sure were in place? There's one of them. This is the collector from the right head that's going to connect to the right side of the turbo. As we move over to the left, first stop is the EGR tube. That's going to go right here. That does not get put in place ahead of time. And then as we continue on over, we have the left side exhaust collector as well. This is a view of the back of the turbo. That's the EGR tube there, and our gasket is going to go in up here. The gasket's kind of neat in that it's got little plugs, so it'll sort of snap into place, which is very convenient. It'll just snap in right there, and that's where the actual output from the exhaust is, or turbo is going to go.
On each side, you've got 3 bolts, and they can be a little difficult to get to because of the angle that you're coming in at and all of that. But with a little bit of trial and error, you can get in there and get all 3 bolts, both sides, tightened down like so. A little hard to see here, obviously, but they're all in there. They just need to be basically tight. I don't know what the torque spec was. I didn't really follow one here.
All right, we have the EGR elbow right here.
We have two gaskets. They're identical. So long bolts go to the top, short bolts to the bottom, and also the gasket will hold those. Should hold those bolts in, but we'll try again. All right, in we go.
Getting the CGR tube installed is one of the more difficult parts. The bottom two bolts aren't so bad. You can kind of see those. The top two, you're working against gravity, and it's up in a spot where you really just can't see. So this kind of thing is
That's definitely not it.
likely to happen. Eventually, and it took me many tries, but eventually I was able to finally get the bolts started up on the top, and once they're started, obviously you can get them tightened down. I found it's really best just to kind of get all four bolts loose, but threaded, and then once they're in, then you can go ahead and get it tightened down. You have to be careful, of course, that the gasket doesn't fall out of place, so you got to feel around for it and make sure it's still there, and getting the bolts to line up correctly is difficult. Again, you're working against gravity here, and you cannot see. This is the real problem. If you look, see, there's the installed EGR tube, but you know its location as we back out from it here is behind the engine, down in a hole underneath the cowl. It's pretty tough. Attaching all of the exhaust to the turbo is a little difficult because again you're underneath the cowl and kind of working backwards and you can't really see. Fortunately, like I said before, this gasket here for the output on the turbo snaps into place, and you can get that snapped in like that. You can see there I'm actually using my little inspection camera to help me figure out what I'm doing, kind of working in a mirror image. That bottom bolt can go in ahead of time, and there's a slot on the collector pipe there that will slide right down there like that, and you'll be able to kind of hold that in place while you put the other bolts in. So if you can kind of start that bottom bolt, it'll hold the exhaust downpipe for you. So get the other two bolts in here like this, and there are torque specs for this. I couldn't really fit a torque wrench back there, so I just tightened them so that they were tight and I didn't have exhaust leaking. Very important to get that next little downpipe. This is the pipe that has the oxygen sensor attached to it. Important to get that rotated around and connected up. It has a little bracket that bolts up to the right head. You want to make sure you do that first, and then once that's done, you can get this little bracket worked down in there, or the clamp rather, that will clamp the exhaust together at that point. Again, kind of fiddly to get that down and in there, but once you do, get it around the two flanges there, and you can just zip it down. Again, there's probably a torque spec, but I don't know what it is. And last but not least, we put the tube on here. You get a little O-ring goes in each side. It'll slip down and fit onto the charge pipe. It's loose, and then you can slide it up and pop it right on the turbo. And that's your outlet pipe from the turbo to the intercooler system. This little clip goes on right here, holds those two pipes together, and there's a little torque screw that keeps that in place. And that's all there is to it.